Yeah, broadcast is also live. Good afternoon, friends. This is Sujit Unni. I work with NASCOM. So, welcome to the 84th edition of NASCOM FAYA Port 80, which this is the second edition of our webinar. Although because of pandemic, we have been doing this. Many of you might be knowing we have been doing this event for the last 2-3 years. Every month we have 3 sessions across Kerala as FAYA Port 80. So for the last 2 editions, we have been doing this as a webinar, and the other thing is we have everybody will be sometimes these sort of a pandemic gives us put us in lock, but this time I'm very so happy because of one reason that we have all been requesting Amrit Sanjeev to get him as a speaker for one of our for FAYA 480 sessions. So this time I feel really thankful because he travels a lot, so we couldn't able to get him on board to the sessions either in Kochi, Trivandrum, or Kozhikode. But thanks to him, so that we could able to get him this time to learn him about the new topic on Android 11. So welcome Sri Amrit Sanjeev on board to this 84th FAYA Port 80 session.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. And many of you might be knowing him. So for the person who a Mallu in Google, who has got a staff developer advocate of Google, which is his designation, and have been working for the last 14-15 years. So much of you might be knowing him. He stays in Bangalore, and he have been a very good for the techie friend for a lot. So that's the reason he is so special for us this day. And before we start, and I think much of our techies who have been watching across our sessions, their dream job could be how to get into a Google space. So that's one of their best job to or a dream job to be in a place where they could able to see in. So it might be, I feel very curious saying that how actually your career run was take you to Google. So that could something which obviously everybody is looking at. So if you could just start on with how you have become Google staff developer advocate. So that story will be of help to everybody. Please.
Sure. So first to say, thanks for the opportunity. Really happy that I could kind of finally join you guys. Yes, like Sujit mentioned, there was a few requests come to my side, but unfortunately the schedules were never aligned and we were not able to do this before. This is one good part of COVID then, that we are all locked in and we have some extra time to kind of do these sort of things. Yeah, coming back to your question, by no means I'm not the only Mallu in Google. There is a lot of us here. I'm one of the few people who they happen to have a job which is external facing also. So some people know us, but I'm not the first guy here or first Mallu here or the only Mallu here. There are plenty of us even in the Bangalore office. So just to keep that myth out. The question that Sujit asked is, how did I reach here? Well, I was a lateral hire. I was somebody who came from a different company into Google. I've been here for the last 5 years or so. My career started instantly in Trivandrum. I started in Technopark. I worked there for a year in a company called In-App Information Technologies. Still consider that to be the best time of my career. It was such an amazing company to work with, amazing colleagues. From there, I moved to IBM, worked there in India, Australia, Portugal, multiple places. And I was actually leading the OS development team at IBM. Finally, as an architect in telecom also. Then moved to Philips as a research engineer, worked there for 2 years in the research. So I did multiple roles, to be very honest. I've been a system designer, I've been a software architect, I've been a researcher. So I've done a few of those things. And from Philips Research, it was Intuit and then to Google. So my journey has been through many companies before coming to Google. And in Google, my career has been in developer advocacy alone. I've worked as a developer advocate and a program manager earlier at Google. And now I lead the developer advocacy initiatives for India. Coming to Google, yeah, like for many of, like you said, it was also kind of one of those companies that I always shortlist to kind of get to. I feel a lot of factors helped getting here, and there is always luck here also. I was in the right place at the right time, to be very honest. I was in this space of advocacy and community development and things like that earlier. I used to do a lot of work in the community part of it, and that could be the reason that Google noticed around it. And when an opportunity came, they called in for an interview, and there was like coding interviews and technical interviews around it. Touch wood, luck and God's grace, I cleared all of that, and now I'm here. And from then, the 5 years has been a blur. It's just happened so quickly, but it's interesting. It's a great place to work, and I'm glad that I'm here.
Thank you, Amrit. One more quick question, like whether GDG helps in, or whether Google seeks in or picks in people from GDG?
Not necessarily. I wouldn't say that is a criteria for us to hire people. For certain jobs, there an exposure to having worked in the community helps. Maybe mostly in the ecosystem team where the community work happens a lot. Having an exposure to it really works, but necessarily GDG is not the only way that we are actually looking for. We hire engineers. So instantly, we don't really hire people from a one particular technology as such. We usually look for great engineers, and most of our interviews are about the basics of things. Uh, it it is sometimes slightly different. That doesn't mean it's very difficult. I wouldn't call Google interview to be any more difficult than say Microsoft or Uber or any of those large companies. It's sometimes a slightly different, and that catches people off guard. And I think that is mistook for a lot of people mistake that for being for an interview that is very difficult. It is not a very difficult interview if you understand that aspect. If you look at the basics very clearly, Google interviews are kind of not very difficult. GDG, definitely, I wouldn't say that is a requirement. If you work in the community, that's always a great thing. I think we always encourage people to actually share and contribute to the community back, but that is not a criteria for hiring as such.
Okay. Moving on to our session, just wanted to make a small announcement. Like, if you want to have, we could able to see comments here. So if people who have been watching it from any of the live streaming like Facebook or YouTube, you can pin in your questions, type your questions. We could able to view in, and Amit could able to get back to that with the questions right away. So coming back to the session, everybody knows it that Android 11 is the latest iteration of the Android that is currently released by Google in the developer purview. So this session, most probably, Amrit Sanjeev will be talking about the top changes that will affect your apps, and also about the new features that you can use to enhance the UX for the existing app. So before taking much of your time, I think back to Amrit. Kindly, enlighten us with the thoughts you have in, and please take us through.
Sure. Thanks, Sujit. So this session, the whole idea, like Sujit mentioned, is to actually go through some of the new features that have come out in Android, and not necessarily be extremely comprehensive. There are too many changes to be called out in one session. So I'm only going to call out things which are really important and might have a direct impact to some of your apps, or at least things that you need to watch out for when you're actually building a new app. So don't consider this to be a comprehensive list. If you search the internet, look through the change logs and things like that, you will find a lot more features that are there. Like I said, I'm only calling out some of the top features here. So I work at Google as a staff developer advocate. I lead a team called Partner DevRel, and all the developer advocacy initiatives for India is the area of work that I actually do. And that includes working with large partners, going to conferences, understanding the pulse of the thing, helping our product teams improve our products to cater to the market a little better, and things like that. Now, agenda, like I said, focus on the new features of R. Talk about only the overview of the top features. I'm not going to deep dive into many, because each feature could be like a 40-minute session. So I'm going to touch upon the basics so that you understand the basic change that is there. And then look at, then you could actually go ahead and start looking at what are the new features or what are the details on that to certainly make changes in your code accordingly. And there will be a more focus on the privacy related aspects, because that is the one which we see a lot of developers getting caught off guard and affecting applications straight off. And obviously I'll top it off with a few new changes that have come, which is specifically new features that we've added in R. So Android 11 and R, basically we keep interchanging it, so they're the same thing that I'm talking about. If I say Android R or Android 11, please consider them to be the same thing here. So when we look at the top things that we have actually showcasing, we worked on a plethora of things here. We worked on helpful innovation. We worked on the platform's performance. Privacy and security has been a big concern. Stabilizing the OS in terms of product excellence has taken a lot of work in that side. Storage, media control, frameworks are all areas that we've worked on. But in this session, like I said, privacy and security and some new features are what I'm going to focus a lot on. Coming to Android 11 as such, this is the 11th iteration of Android. A lot of things have changed over the years. A lot of developers, now we have the yearly release cycle, and we also have the play policy in place where you have to kind of take the next latest version to be like if you're at 11, this August 10 will become the minimum base that you have to apply as your target SDK, so that apps can actually be uploaded to Google Play. So that will happen. So next year 11 will be the one which you will have to target. So having a good understanding of this and having an understanding of the changes and the mitigation plans for your app is required. Not all changes in Android 11 need all changes in Android 11 would actually get reflected backward, which means maybe in Android 10 some of those API or restrictions will not apply, and only on devices that run Android 11 will have those changes and restrictions in place. But that doesn't mean that you should not work on your apps for that, because there will be a flurry of devices that will get automatic upgrades. That's just not the Google phones. There is third-party manufacturers also upgrading really quickly right now to the latest version of Android once the final release is out there. So it is important that during this time you work on figuring out the changes that are required and then update it accordingly. I'll start with the Android 11 timelines. For the last couple of years, or rather for the last many years, we have been releasing Android with developer preview, then beta releases, and then finally releasing the app, final build, which is actually flashed onto devices later. Now, in the developer preview phase, what we really expect people to do is to actually use the build. This is a signed build. This is something that you can install on a device. This is something you can install on a device, and then you can go ahead and test your apps on this. During developer preview, there will be multiple developer previews. This time there are 4. In each of these developer previews, what we do is we incrementally release new features and apply the new changes that we have made to the platform and share it to the external developers. Developers can then run their app, understand what is the change that your apps actually need to function really well on the platform. Now, after developer review, it goes into a phase called as a beta. Now, May is when we are actually going to go mostly to the beta releases. By beta release, your API contracts are going to be kind of finalized. There will be changes that will come if there are bugs that are coming, but more or less the API contract will be frozen. And then there will be platform stability cycles that will run, and finally the final release of the OS will be kept. So during the developer preview, it is best to kind of test it with every developer preview that is releasing, because there will be some changes even to the APIs and also to the API behavior that based on the feedback that we are receiving. So test continuously during developer preview in each developer preview. But my suggestion would be, do not jump in and go ahead and change your application to work, change your application code to fit the need for a developer preview. It would be best that application changes are starting to be finalized only in beta releases, so that the API contract is at least finalized, and that makes it much more easier for you to go ahead and update your apps accordingly. And before the final release, your app should be, before the final release is out there, your app should be completely compatible with the platform. And that way, your users who are using the latest and greatest platform on an platform does not really have issues with your app. So just to reiterate, during this phase of developer preview, you should review the program timelines, get an overview understanding of what are the key dates and details on what each of these changes will be there. Second thing is set up an environment. It doesn't mean that you always have to get a device. You would also have emulator available for you to test these features. Certain things like Bluetooth and Wi-Fi might not be testable on an emulator, but most of the changes are. And we usually release an emulator built along with these with the flashable thing. If you have a Pixel device, compatible Pixel device, you can always flash a developer preview on that, or at least use the emulator and start testing. Set up your Android Studio. There will be tools and the preview SDK that you need to download to understand the changes, and go through the setup guide so that your Android Studio is ready for your developers to go ahead and test these things. And lastly, go ahead and clearly understand from a theoretical perspective what are the big changes that are there, the behavior changes that are there, and the new features that are available. The first priority should be fix the breaking changes. So figure out the places where your app in the current state without any changes break, and why they are breaking and how you can fix them. That should be your priority before you jump in and try to fix up a lot of issues, or rather add new features into your app. Another thing I want to really call out here is this: during the developer preview phase, we always look for feedback. So if there are use cases that you have, or if there are situations in which your app's use case is not catered well by the new API, you have performance issues or something like that, which does not work well in your user workflow, this is a time for sharing that feedback with our team. We actually take this feedback, look at the top changes that people are requesting us to make, and we actually go ahead and do those changes during developer preview. Developer preview is the best time for you to give feedback. Beta releases, by beta release, a lot of these changes given by the community and given by third-party developers are actually taken care of, and we actually incorporate that and change the behavior slightly to help these developers succeed in the market. So please do give that feedback if you have any. And if you finally update your app, test your apps, and then finally update your app to target 11, and if possible, the reason we say if possible is because there might be some changes that you don't want from a gated behavior perspective. If things are all right, please go ahead and update and see and test it with real users to understand if there are real world crashes or real world issues that you guys are seeing. Now, let me quickly jump to the privacy changes. The reason why I want to kind of highlight this is because there is a lot of users who are, or a lot of apps actually get caught off guard by this. And this has been an area of interest for us for a very long period of time. In a privacy perspective, in Android 10, we actually did a lot of changes. Over 50 privacy features were actually 50 Android new privacy features were added to some as changes to the existing features, or some completely new features were added in order to ensure that privacy for the user as well as the app data is maintained. I'm not going to go through that list right now, but these were the main buckets in which changes happened. With permissions, there were a lot of changes. With device ID and access to them, access to permanent IDs, which could then be traced back to a user, things like that were disabled. There was background activity restriction, so things how things were running in the background, how things could be launched in the background, those were all edited to ensure that the behavior was edited to ensure that user privacy is considered, user privacy is maintained. Now in Android 11, we are bringing in more protection. There is privacy change, there's foreground services type, scope storage, package visibility, data access auditing. These are all the new areas that we've actually worked a lot on privacy changes. I have slides for each of them to kind of go through. And towards the end of the, I can take some questions if you have any. Now, I'll start with scope storage. Scope storage was introduced in Android 10. Basically, the idea of scope storage was to kind of protect the app's data as well as the user privacy by controlling access to the amount of data an app can access. To explain this a little better, if you take the Android app memory, for example, there are two types of memory. One is an internal storage, which basically the app app would use to store its private data. And then there is external storage. If an app gets read-write access to the external storage, all the files in the external storage were earlier accessible to a app. That means an app could take the external storage permission, read external storage permission, and then read through all the directories that are there in external storage. Whether that was created by your own app or by somebody else was not a problem. It could still be created. It could still access that. It could go ahead, and if it had write permission from the user, it could go ahead and make changes. There were malicious apps which would corrupt other apps' files and things like that. And that was a possible use case due to the way the structuring was done. In scope storage, what we have done is we have taken the app storage to be only accessible by the owner. In the shared storage space, you basically have a division, which is basically all the media files will be separate. All the media files are actually accessed through the media store APIs, and all the documents and other files are only accessible through a system picker. The intention here is to access any file, the user is aware and has to give permission to her. Now, assume that you have photos it's a photo app. So you would actually take the photograph and then capture the photo, write it to the disk. When you write it to the disk, you are the only app that can access it. Now, if you want to share it with other apps, you will add it to the media store. Now, a new app, when it comes and it wants to access that particular media photo, what it does is it will then request for the user for a read permission. When the read permission is allocated, the user can then access the media files, which is there in the media store. So all the files, it cannot go and edit directly. It can actually go and read all that data. So that way you could keep all your media files, access all your media files. When it comes to, like, say you want to go and pick a random file from a folder, then the only way to pick that is using your system picker API. The system picker API is presented to the user. The user will have to go and access the file that the app is manually go to the location and then select the file it needs to access. And the user will have to give permission for this. And the whole idea is that without user permission, there is no direct access to files created by other apps. And the system picker is basically standardizes the way in which apps would then go and access files which are written by third-party apps. Like you want to pick something from a download folder and things like that. Now, scope storage has also introduced a lot of additional benefits in terms of apps without any permission can only access their files created by themselves, which means they can't go and corrupt other files. It cannot read directories and figure out what other apps are actually there on the device. It cannot guess that information. There's another interesting thing that we've done with media files is there's a new permission that was introduced to avoid users from, or rather avoid apps from reading the metadata in files. If you look at photos, for example, photos have metadata like location metadata is there. It always, in the metadata of the photo, there's always location information, lat long information available. Now, if somebody were to scan through all the photos, they would get a lot of locations where this phone has actually been, which could be a privacy concern, right? Now, without actually requesting the user for a new permission, that metadata is always stripped off before giving to the app. So if the app is planning to access that metadata, there is a new permission that is required to be accessed, location metadata. The app will have to then ask for that information, ask for that permission. When the user gives that permission is only when that metadata information is passed to the app, and then location. Then you can track location based on that information also. There are certain points where you need access to all the files. For example, file managers or backup and restore sort of stuff. There you need to access all the files in the system. And in such cases, there is a special app access that we are giving, but it is only granted when the app is able to show a very clear use case where it requires this to be there. And there will be Google Play policy that will be guarding the use of this permission. So without this permission, if you're adding this permission to your app, you have to ensure that you abide by the Google Play policy for your app to be released in Google Play. Otherwise, the system will not allow you to do that. Another very interesting change is the one-time permission. There's a new permission option where you could provide access to access to either location, recording of audio information, or camera information, where it can be only used one time. The intention here is that when the user provides this, there are many use cases where the user is asked for a permission, say to take a picture for the profile during sign up, and after that there is no need for that permission throughout the user's journey. Or if you want to share the location to a person, only during that one location share is where you need the app really requires, and not to keep it throughout the lifetime of the app. To avoid misuse of such scenarios, what we've done is where there's a new permission added called as only this time. When the user clicks only this time, the app will give access to that permission only for the duration of that session. The session is defined as a time frame from when the permission is given, from that point to when the app goes into the background, and no foreground services using this permission is running. So if all the foreground services are cancelled and your app goes into the background, then you lose this permission. The session is considered to be over and the permission is lost. This is not target SDK gated. So what will happen is if you run your application on a device running Android level, this behavior will come up. There is no special enumerator for only this time. It will be something that will be presented to every app when the location or record or camera permission is requested by the app. Then you might notice that the deny button is there. Earlier we had deny and do not ask again. Now deny and do not ask again is moved to deny. So multiple denies by the user will ensure that it becomes deny and don't ask again. And then the app will not be able to request for the permission again. Just to ensure this, ensure that behavior is consistent, it is more important that you actually share the rationale why you need the permission, and not let the user guess this, because if the user is left to guess this, there's a lot of chance that they might turn off the AP. They might not understand it and give deny multiple times, and then the whole request for permission cannot be asked, and the user will then have to be taken to the settings and they have to go to the app permissions, and that's a much more complicated flow, and not every user is comfortable doing that. So please be careful about this. Ensure that the rationale is clearly communicated so that the user can take an informed decision when this dialogue comes up to the screen. Now there's also location permission change. This was introduced in 10, but it was given as a recommendation. There is a difference of foreground, how foreground location is accessed, and then the recommendation was that foreground location should first be accessed, and then background location should be accessed. So there's a different permissions available, and you got to get both the permissions if you want to track the user in foreground as well as in background. Now in Android 10, users were encouraged to incrementally request for location permission, first foreground and then all time location access. But in Android level, this has become a requirement. So if you have not adjusted your apps to actually take both the permissions one after the other, and as relied on getting all the permissions the first time itself, you will have to make some changes to ensure that this requirement is complied with. Now, if you look at foreground service types, this was introduced again in Android 10, where we did this to ensure that apps declare an intention, why they would declare an intention of information access when they are in foreground. So in a foreground service, so a foreground service that actually accesses location needs to kind of give clearly specify in the manifest that they need the service type is location, so that the service the service gets access to location. So the intention is clearly defined in the manifest in the first place. If you don't define this service types, the foreground service will run, but location data will be null. That API call will always return null to avoid because that particular manifest information is not given. We are adding more to syncing of data, phone calls, device, and there are two more. These were defined in Android 10, basically. Media projection, location, sync data, and all that were defined earlier in Android 10. But in 11, we have two more for microphone and camera. So if the user is going to use, if there is a service that is running in the background and is actually going to access microphone, that has to be declared in your intent. Otherwise, there's no microphone data that is actually passed. Towards to the system to ensure that the user is able to get the functionality correctly. Without this, the system doesn't crash. So this is something that you have to take take up. So I have a question here. So I'll just take that quickly. One-time permission is pretty good. Appreciate that. Is it controlled by the number of API calls or by the time duration? So it's not controlled by either of this. It's basically the duration of time the app is actually in the foreground. So it's not like you have a time duration of 5 minutes for permission, one-time permission. What you have as a problem, what you have as a requirement is it's not controlled by API number of API calls either. The user the user would actually give permission from that time to the time when this is actually when the user is actually exiting the app by actually putting the app in the background with no foreground services actually running at that point of time. Till that time, the permission is there. Once the user puts the app in the background, the permission is actually lost. I hope that answers the question. Is there a way to undo the choice? I feel no, there is no way to undo that choice. When you say only one time, that is presented only once for that session. The next time the user comes to that point, the user will be asked that the permission all over again. If it is deny that you're talking about undoing the deny choice, you can always you can always go back to the permissions app information to the permission section and go ahead and change it. Currently, 2 denies will be considered as do not deny and do not ask again. The question is how many times would the user have to actually deny to be for the system to consider as deny and don't ask again. Currently, it's set to 2. This is developer preview, so we are taking feedback, and if that seems to be too low, if you feel that's too low, please do share that feedback with us, and then we will take and evaluate that and then make adjustments accordingly. So I'm gonna quickly move on. Like I mentioned, the foreground service types, please do mention that this is a change which can get easily missed, probably from the fact that this does not crash the app. Only the behavior will change as if the user has not seen that user is not getting data from the hardware. Now, foreground notification also has some changes that are coming. Now, if you take foreground notifications earlier, you would see that you couldn't swipe them out. They would always remain in the tray. Some users do have concerns of this because it's cluttering up the tray, taking up too much real estate on the screen. Now, foreground notifications can be swiped, but they cannot be swiped out. They are actually minimized. So you have your active or alerting pane. If you take a notification, they're bucketed, right? There's an alerting pane, then there is your silent notifications, and now we have added another pane called as foreground services. Now, when you swipe out a foreground service notification, it actually goes and moves to the foreground notifications page. By clicking on the icon there, it will automatically get expanded to the full screen, full notification back in the alerting tray again. So you can see that you can minimize it, but you cannot completely take it off the screen. User will always be aware of what's running in the background, but not necessarily need to keep. Once they are aware, they have the choice to move it to a minimized state and bring it back up again. Package visibility is an other area which is interesting, and this will have straight impact for a lot of apps which have sharing and things like that. One of the things that people used to do is to query for a package name, or query for a package name, and then figure out whether that app is installed before calling an intent to that app. It could be sharing data with an application, or another use case is you want to create a custom sharing sheet. So you would give an intent and ask for all the apps that can actually service that intent, and then take those and populate your your custom share sheet. Now, both these cases have slight changes right now. If you actually call get package information, you will get your packages information. And if you get all packages information, you get your package information plus system packages. User installed applications cannot be straight away understood using this. The way you need to kind of do this is by adding a new manifest element called as queries. In queries, you can either provide the full package name of the package that you want to search for, which means if I say com Android 11 test application in queries, I can actually use get package info for com Android 11 package Android 11 test application and figure out whether that is installed or not. Without that queries tag where you explicitly put your package names that you want to query, you will not be able to query and get package information for those things. The other way of querying for information of packages is to kind of use intent. You can say that, oh, I have this data type and all the intents that with this intention, maybe share intent. What are the apps that are help me query all the apps that are that allow for that allow this intention to be completed. So all the apps to which say that particular data type can be shared, you can query and get their package information. So you can provide either the exact package name, give the exact package name, or the intent filter for it. And then Android 11 also introduces a query all packages permission. This is a completely new permission for certain apps which require querying all packages, but this again will be gated by a Google policy. So be aware of that policy before you actually use this permission. A lot of apps usually collect information about what other apps are installed on the device, maybe for analytics purposes or for changing behavior. That without declaring now, it will be nearly impossible to get that information. So this is again a change where you might need to do extensive testing, because querying for package to understand what other packages are installed is a very common practice. Even some libraries do this, so you have to also check the third-party library. But okay, there's one question I want to take that. But won't that mean I will be able to know which packages are installed? No, it's the other way around. If you are without the queries and without using the queries element and telling us which packages you need to know information about, you will not be able to see the other packages installed. Hope I answered that question. So you have to explicitly tell the system what are the packages you will actually query and figure out whether they're installed or not to ensure that your operations run correctly. Earlier, that is you could just query all packages and get all the package information that is there, and you can iterate through it and figure out whether the one you're looking for is there. Right now, without declaring, you can't do this. So moving on to the next one. This is a very interesting API. One of the things that developers have actually told us in some of the feedback that they've shared is it's quite difficult. The access to private information and the effort to control that is great. They like it. They are supportive of that. But at the same time, it's difficult for existing apps to kind of understand where the private data access is coming from, and potentially do they have a private data access leak within their app currently. That's why there's a new thing called data access auditing that is introduced in Android level, where you can this can be used in order to identify and potentially figure out all the unintended or unexpected data accesses. There's a new app ops manager which collects information about private data access and then can give a callback to your application. Callback to your application, informing it about a data access. So while your application is running, you could be doing things like logging it, calling it out to your user if that is required, or it could be most people are using this right now to kind of understand what all modules and data areas in their application is going and accessing some private data. And there's also things like you can define context in which private within the private auditing. So you can actually define each of your module with a different name, and then say that then pass that information to the app ops manager call, where what it does from that point is when a private data access comes from that particular feature or particular module, it will log with that extra additional information. So you know that at this point, one of the private data was accessed by the application, and that access came from this module. And then you can actually drill down and figure out this. And this greatly helps in terms of figuring out such unexpected data accesses for very large applications. Now, this slide I put in there, I'm not going to read through it. It's just to kind of give you some of the mitigation strategies as well as the privacy changes in 11. This is available on our developer.android.com. Please do look at it, and this gives you a quick mitigation plans and the kind of apps that get affected. So you can very quickly understand the changes required and kind of look deeply into those things if needed. Now, let's move on to some of the new features. I'm going to quickly touch upon some new features. Not all of them will affect you. You might find some of these things interesting, and maybe these are things that you can add to your app. One thing that definitely is important is a non-SDK access. So if you look at Android, for instance, we actually divide your APIs into 4 buckets: white, black, light gray, and dark gray. I'll explain what it is. White is the public SDKs that are SDK APIs that are available. We ensure that their behavior will be consistent and compatible with future releases. Blacklist is a set of APIs that should not be used. They are either called as private APIs that your app is not supposed to use. They are used by the system and exposed by the system for special use cases only. And their behavior is not documented. But since Android being an open source platform, people do look through the source code and figure out certain APIs, and there are certain hacks that people do using these blacklist APIs. Now, why we are actually doing this blacklist, very strongly enforcing the blacklist APIs, is because this will not help you build a consistent experience on Android. Blacklist, the APIs that are listed under the blacklist is not supposed to be used within your application. Anything that you use from that will result in either a null pointer exception or no data being passed back to you. So it is very important that you figure out and mitigate that there are nothing in blacklist which your app is using, or any SDK that your app is using uses these APIs. Light gray app is basically used by apps, but they are supposed to be things that are allowed to be used for some time, but things in light gray will actually go into blacklist over a period of time. Dark gray again is something that is used by apps but with older SDK version, and when the SDK version target SDK version updates, we hope this will automatically get mitigated. So in a nutshell, except for anything that is there on the white list, please, if you have any API which is outside of those whitelist, please ensure that you use something which is an alternative to this, and do ensure that you do not use those API, continue to use those APIs in future releases of your app. You might be wondering how you can figure out these things. It is written to logcat every single time a blacklist API or anything outside of whitelist is used. That is actually written into the logcat. So going with the logcat and filtering out those filtering out with the tag will allow you to see all the non-public SDKs that is or non-public APIs that your app is using to get its functionality. This is very dangerous. Use of this is very dangerous because there is no guarantee or no notification that you get that things have changed. Things can change between releases. Things can change between updates of the OS, between updates of components of the OS. All this can happen. So you might have an app which is perfectly running one day. User updates the OS or user updates a part of the components on the OS like a play service, and then have the app crash continuously from then on, leading to a poor experience. So ensure that you're only using things which are the public API, SDK APIs. This also is important because everything that is in the gray and gray area, gray list, which are APIs you shouldn't use but allowed for time being, with every subsequent release, we will move many of them into blacklist. If you take Android 10 to 11, if you would see some of the stats of, we have moved 900 test APIs to blacklist right now, and there are many other APIs that are actually getting blacklisted. System APIs, test APIs are all blacklisted in mainline, which means if you are using any of this to bring about a functionality within your app, they will start failing, and that'll lead to a poor user experience. This is another one during developer preview that you will have called an App Compatibility Framework. This is a completely new tool that we have introduced for testing. Now, one of the concerns that developers told about using developer preview was that if there is one bug or one breaking change that they find in their app, without fixing that, they are not able to test any further. Now, with the compatibility framework, what we are allowing is to toggle certain features on and off. Say, for example, you can toggle, say, scope storage behavior completely. You can make it behave like how it was behaving in Android 10 and before by toggling. So if there is something that is breaking in your device, in your application, because of a scope storage change specifically introduced in Android 11, you can toggle it and make it work like before, and understand whether that was a bug before or bug that was an existing bug, or something that was introduced during Android 11, introduced by Android 11 changes. The other advantage is that you can test behavior of your app to a single change by toggling everything off and turning that one single change and running through your app. And that allows you to continue testing and isolating and identifying how each behavior change is affecting your app, and increase your ability to test and fix your apps faster. The thing to note is that this will not be available in the final build. This will only be there in the developer preview builds. The final signed build will not have this feature at all. So this cannot be relied upon by developers to make sure that their app runs on certain versions. So like, if instead of fixing scope storage, going and asking users to toggle this will not be a solution. It is only there in developer preview builds, and it's a testing feature. And also refresh rates. We now have devices which are standard is 60 hertz. That's what we know, and then we also have something like 90 hertz devices also, which basically will switch between 90 and 60 depending on what the screen supports. In 11, apps and games can choose their refresh rates and choose and say that I want a particular refresh rate to run properly to avoid janks. This is really important for things like games where you need to run at a certain space because of the extra computing that it does to ensure that your screens are jank free. This is both available in SDK as well as NDK, so that games can directly use it from that area also. Be cautious that there will be battery consumption implications by requesting a higher rate, higher refresh rate, and at the same time your compute cycles have to be really small. Otherwise, you will start seeing janks or frozen frames happening because you have requested for a higher refresh rate. There is a lovely article on Medium written by an engineer who worked on this feature in the Google developers, Android developers, Medium blog post where he has explained why this feature is important. And this doesn't mean that the device will run. If you say a device is supporting 60 and 90, that doesn't mean that they run only in 60 and 90. It can request for 60 by 2 or 90 by 2, depending on how much computer is doing. And there are more features like that you can, I mean, more details like that you can find in that article. So resume on reboot is another feature which is interesting from perspective of, you all know that Android OTA installations, we wanted to improve the experience of OTA installations, and and in order to do this, what we've done is we have tried to install the device, so you can actually leave the device overnight and it will get installed and rebooted automatically. But if you have noticed, the current Android devices, when you reboot, you have to actually unlock the device the first time for all the functions to be active, and that is because there's a credential encrypted storage. After reboot, access to them is restricted. Now we are actually supporting direct boot for device encrypted storage part, and traditional encrypted is when you actually unlock, is when that happens. So it means that your device will actually go into OTA installation, reboot, and will be able to run. And when the user actually unlocks it the next time is when the user specific features might just get enabled. There's also 5G state API, which is support for 5G. We don't have that network here, but this is a future improvement for a lot of apps here. There is you can take advantage of the improved speed and latency, decreased latency in 5G networks, but at the same time you also want to understand the 5G dynamic metered API as well as a bandwidth estimator API. And when you use this with the state API, you will be able to kind of decide what speeds you want to kind of use for downloads and things like that. You don't want to sometimes download at full HD on a device that does not support full HD. So those sort of things can be actually determined by using this API and then adjusting your speeds accordingly. Call screening. If your apps, I don't know how many of you guys actually have this, but then you get additional details when an app is rejected. So if you're building an app that is doing call screening, there is more information that you get, both for your analytics as well as to actually inform the user on what the actions they can perform on the screen. So there are some improvements in the call screening aspects too. This is minor from a perspective that there are not many call screening apps that we've seen from India. But if you are one of those special developers who works on this area, this is an area that you might want to kind of take a look at. There is WirelessDB coming, which has been something that developers have been asking for a lot of time. You can actually connect to devices on the same network wirelessly and using without having to connect it through a wire. And then send ADB commands to it. And this once turned on, so each time you turn on, you have to pair it with the computer once, and then if they're on the same network, using a QR code or a PIN. And after that, you can actually communicate directly without actually having the wire. And this is a welcome change for a lot of developers, because this has been some feature that a lot of people have asked for a long time. Now with screen recording, there are some changes to it. There is an improved UI that comes in where the user can enable audio recording, and also turn on and off audio recording and show touches right from the notification tray. Earlier you had to go into the system settings to do this. Now you have it straight here, and this was a request that a developer had said, because many a times people want to record the screen but not record the audio. Lastly, and also the notification right now with when you're actually doing the screen recording, that notifications color is a highly visible red background, so that it is clearly visible to the user that screen recording is happening at any point they pull down the notification tray. There were actions that you could perform on the notification tray earlier, but they have removed right now. So the user can just start and cancel this from the notification that you can see on the screen. Lastly, notification history. Some apps already had this feature earlier. Now you might just sometimes very quickly dismiss a certain message and then not realize that oh, you did not read it completely or you did not understand it. Notification history is a new feature that enables you to see your entire history of notifications. This is there in developer preview. Like we said, this is not a final design of it. This if you turn this feature on, what happens, every notification that you got, when you got, and whatever you recently dismissed are actually you can actually go back and revisit and understand what is there. This screenshot that I've shown here is not the final design, as it is not like 100% ready for real world usage. This at the developer review, we are testing out a few things, and so this design might change a bit. You might be able to access this. You are able to access this currently from the history shortcut in the notification shade. And to wrap up, there are plenty more features that than what I have talked to you about, which is there in the Android 11 developer preview right now. I'd strongly encourage you guys to go and check. This is a set of things that I actually taken from the 9 to 5 Google website, where they keep writing articles about the new features in each developer previews. So you can always check them out. But my whole thing that I want to kind of call out is that there are a lot more features which you might be able to use in order to improve the experience within your apps. And if you find something useful, or if you find something that is broken, or you have a feature request or a behavior change request, please do let us know. This is the right time to actually let the team know about that. And once beta comes in, once the beta release is rolled out, it is usually quite difficult to make large changes to the system. So if there's feedback, this is the great time to show that. And reiterating, we are nearly close to the end of the developer preview, and beta releases are going to start off. So this is the last chance. Give the feedback. And once the beta releases are there, please start mitigating the problems that you have noticed in developer previews, and start looking for changes and alternative APIs. And that's it from me for today. Hope this was useful for you guys and you learned something new, and you would try Android 11 for sure. Yeah, you can always, so if there's more information like this, I usually use my Twitter handle to share that. That's my Twitter handle, AM Sanjeev. So if you wanna get more information of 11 or Android development and Kotlin development in general, do follow that.
Yeah. Thank you for the session. This was wonderful. So meanwhile, we could able to maybe a couple of last 3 questions. Maybe the viewers were able to do that. We can accommodate that also. So by the time they will. Pop up with a question, so I thought of making one more. Yeah, it's coming up again. Please.
So do you want me to take these questions right now, or do you want me to do it? Okay. I'll try and answer them. I might have to skip certain things because I don't know much. There might be areas which I don't know. So let me go through the questions and see how much I can help with this. It would be really interesting to get a perspective of Flutter adoption or even other MADPS as harnessing adoption popularity. Also, the perspective on what would be a logical starting point. I think the question is not complete, but for a novice. Okay, for a novice. Okay, got it. So Flutter, Flutter is an interesting space. It's actually getting a lot of attention lately. The development is in Dart, so you have to learn a completely new language there. If your use case really falls under this multi-platform, quick development sort of a environment, Flutter can be a choice. There are apps in production that do use Flutter. People can't use it. I wouldn't really compare it completely against the native platform development because the platform like the Android SDK and using the native development is a more of a proven and a long-term use perspective. So Flutter really does work very well for certain use cases. where this quick iteration is required, or where there is a cross-platform requirement is there, yes, that can be a choice. Regarding background activity start, I believe it's introduced in Android 10 itself. Say if I want to show an activity while some action performs at the server, what would be the best practice to do? So you can't really launch the activities from the background. You're right, that's introduced in Android 10. The background activity start is prevented from then on. That is because there's a lot of abuse on that. A recommended way or one option for you to do is to actually use a push notification, show a notification about this change, and when the user clicks on the notification, launch the activity which shows the entire information. The reason for doing this is we want the user not to be the user to take an action to see go to the activity rather than directly launching activities from the background. To give you an example, this is the real situation that happened. We had one of the senior leaders from Android who actually was in a different country and was traveling in a taxi. The person in the taxi was using the Uber app, and this is a story that's been shared a few times, but I'm just reiterating. Was using the Uber app or a Google Maps app, and then he had some other app installed on the device, which kept throwing up full screen activities, which had ads. This person, while he was driving, trying to close it so many times to ensure that he sees where he's going in the map. And this led to the problem that we then started looking into this data, and we realized that a lot of apps actually and then keep showing information which at an inappropriate time when the user is not requesting for it, and that's why this limitation is there right now. What will be the improvements or changes to the Android neural network API in Android 11? So you'll have to wait for that. We haven't actually shared that information completely yet. The DP4 and beta previews, by then you will actually get to know more about this. I think there is a... Okay, the question keeps moving for me. Okay, I'm gonna try and do this. I think there is a WebSocket API on Android platform to connect to Linux kernel with a blockchain API. Am I right? I am not very sure of this. I'll have to go back and check and come back to you on this one. Not my area of expertise. Sorry about that. I think we answered this regarding. Yeah, we answered that one, I think. WirelessDB support in Android and below by Android terminal 11. Do you have any terminal commands required other than QR code? So that was not official support, I feel. We're officially supporting this now. I am not aware of the terminal commands required other than. So there is you can either do it through QR code for pairing, or you can use a PIN number for pairing. That's the two options that I've seen from a UI perspective there. Yes, that's what the questions.
Yeah, I think we have done with the questions.
Okay, cool.
So before I thank Amrit, I just want to make a small announcement. We still wanted to have our users, because this FAYA port 80, which is being run by the support of NASCOM, CAFIT, and JTAC, and many others. It's a community where peer group learning has been made possible all these years. So we want all your active support in terms of, we could enable giving you this platform as a speaker as well. In order to that, we will be sending you a feedback form. So please write back to us, and if you're capable enough of taking sessions with your skill sets, then obviously we could able to consider you for giving this opportunity for taking us as a speaker as well for the next time. So if you have the GDG guys over there who are able to take sessions on tools and requirements and stuff like that, please write back to us. So our feedback forms will soon reach you over the mail. That is one announcement we want to take. So I think one or two questions as well. See, over to you. Back.
Yeah, if there are more questions, Just want to share this. If there are more questions that you have after this, after the session, please feel free to ask me on Twitter, and I'll try and get the answers for you. I might, if I don't know those answers, I'll try and find it internally and then share that with you guys. So coming back to the question, if did the Flutter apps get the new Android 11 updates such in native apps? So I think the question is, will the Flutter apps also have the same limitations? Yes, Flutter apps will be subject to all the same limitations the Android apps have, or all these changes will affect them also. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, so you could say, but rather than me telling me, it's the people against selling guys saying that it's an awesome session. So thank you, Amrit Sanjeev, once again. So so glad that we could able to get you on board for one of our sessions. So probably we could able to come back to you next time onwards sooner than late, so that you could able to come back with another topic, so that to enlighten our people around. So thank you so much again. So thank you all the supporters, and thank you all the viewers for joining us this evening. Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity.